much for the welcome and for the invitation to ABI. And it's really great to be here. Just to share some thoughts with you and share with you some of the things that we have been doing in the group and participating in. So the title of my talk today is From Principles to Practice, Operationalizing Data Governance for Africa. I mean, I hope that some of the principles and practice are of course, of interest more widely even than for Africa. So I thought I would start just talking to you about the principles. And this is actually the shortest bit of what I'm going to talk to you about today. So I think the most fundamental principle of why we work with data is because we want to use African data to improve African outcomes. And that means ensuring the maximal use of data to improve African, but also global lives. So whatever we learn in Africa, we want that to be beneficial, more widely in the world as well. So it's really about a wide-reaching process and not leaving anyone out. We want to ensure that we do no harm and that benefit lands where it's due, so that nobody's left out of benefiting in the kind of data ecosystem. And to do that, we need to use appropriate governance frameworks. I've got a kind of favorite framework that I tend to use myself, and this is just based on my own experiences working with different types of data, genomics data, human genomics data, but also health data from the health service. And I use these kind of six columns. Legislation, which means staying within the law, being ethical, and that is kind of our benefits against our risks and making sure the balance is fair. I call these structural protections. What that means is things like firewalls and having servers that are locked down and protected. So the kind of physical infrastructure that protects data. And then procedural protections are more like the processes by which people can access data. So it might be a process whereby you have to put an application here using that form and it's reviewed over there, and this is the person who makes the decisions, and that's a custodian. So that's why I split out the kind of structural and procedural differences. I think they're quite different, but the aim is to have protection infrastructure. Equity, we're going to talk about more today, but equity is really around making sure that it's fair and that there are equal spreads of the benefits and the risks. That it's not one side taking all the risk and another side getting all the benefits, for example. And then finally, sustainability, which is quite a big package of things. So part of this is about having sustainable systems so that if somebody leaves, all the information about the data doesn't leave with them. Or if there are standard operating procedures, that they're all stored and kept up to date in an appropriate way. It also means having proper backup, proper disaster recovery plans for your data so that they can be used into the future effectively. And then increasingly, as we talk about, large data centers and this huge infrastructure to support the data ecosystem, actually sustainability is becoming increasingly about environmental impact and making sure that we do as little harm as possible there as well. So those are like my six pillars that I tend to think of when talking about the principles underlying data governance. And the baseline to make those pillars functional is to have data standards, standards for processing data or managing data, documentation that's fit for purpose, standard operating procedures, workflows, specifications, the infrastructure I talked about that makes this all possible, clarifying roles and responsibilities, and then quality control and monitoring and evaluation. Those are some of the things I thought about that really make it possible to have a functional kind of ecosystem for data governance. And then there's this middle layer, which I've put sort of just below the roof. And this is something we don't all talk about because it's a very difficult space. And that's the idea of enforcement. And actually, enforcement of data governance is one of the hardest spaces. And I don't think we have great answers for that yet. So I'm not going to talk much about it today because I don't think I have really any answer-based things to tell you. I think it's still all quite a tricky space, let's say. But I think this is a package of governance. This is my idea of a governance framework to make sure that all these different parts can come together for a functional whole. But so I'm going to turn to the practice because I think there's a lot already out there about the principles, about how we should be doing it, what we ought to do, how we should be making things work. And I think the practice is much more interesting. So that's mainly what I'm going to be talking about today. I've obviously been working in Africa most of my career, and it's been a quite a long time of engaging with researchers in the ethics space, governance space, talking about sustainability and how we can make this work, in the long term. And then equity is really a much newer conversation. It's a much more recent subject that is getting attention finally at last, and taking us forward for a more complete sort of human-centered or people-centered approach to the end use of data. So historically, we had this enormous drive for open access. So the open access movement was a big and exciting movement, and the principles were really nice. The idea was that everybody should be able to access data and make best use of them. And that meant that funders required that if they funded research, then the data would be made open access through open databases. And even now, peer-reviewed journals often have a requirement that if you're publishing on a data set, you have to state how you made that data set available to everyone else. And yeah, the data goes to open access repositories. Biospecimens sometimes have to be, funders require that they're submitted to centralized biobanks. And often in these kind of scenarios, the access to data is managed through separate constituted data access committees. So this big drive for open access, I mean, it really has been a very big push over the years, and it's starting to slightly modify now. But I think still the way I think about it is the open access sort of process is all about the getting. Who can get the data? Who can get the samples? Who can get the publications? It's really at that end of the pipeline for data use. It's about the end user, the consumer, and how they're going to be able to access the data sets that are out there, or biospecimens. We're going to talk about data mainly today, but I mean, the open access movement is also related to biospecimen access. We also had the FAIR principles, and I'm sure many of you are familiar with the FAIR principles. It's all about the data being findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And it's also a very nice set of principles in terms of, making us really think about how we package our data, how we store our data, how we advertise what we have. But I would also say that the FAIR principles are all about the getting of the data. Who can get the data? Can they find the data when they want to get it? Can they use the data? Is it interoperable? Is it in a format that they understand? Can they use the data? Can they get the data for the next onward steps? So it's also very much at that end of the value proposition. It's for the end user or the consumer who wants to get data. The FAIR principles are extremely supportive of that. More recently, we've seen this kind of lonely E tagged onto FAIR principles. And I did quite a bit of research online just to try and find who coined the E on the end of FAIR principles. You'll see it out there, FAIR principles plus E. And I could find very little about it. It's some people would say it's about being equitable, ethical, empowered, even engagement. And what I could find online was pretty much no one really knows. So please tell me if you do. I'd love to hear more. What I did find is that it seems to have first appeared in a footnote in some WHO guidelines, simply acknowledging that the FAIR principles don't really cover these areas of equitable, ethical, etc. In a very fair acknowledgement, in a very reasonable acknowledgement. And that was about all the sort of backstory I could find for the E. So I'm not sure that it's very helpful. And I think FAIR principles plus E it doesn't have any development to make it be anything substantial beyond being all about the getting of data, the getting end. And I'm a bit of a cynic, so for me it feels a bit like virtue signaling. We're talking about fair plus E now, but I don't think there's a lot backing up that E in terms of actions or deliverables or frameworks or guidelines that are very specific to fair plus E. I mean, I hope there is something out there that I just happen to miss, but I'm not finding it hugely convincing in terms of giving us practical ways to do the equitable, ethical, empowered, engaged, and other E things, data sharing. So I think we're still talking about that end of the value chain about getting data, accessing data, getting hold of data. And with the E, we're kind of hoping that we can say that we got hold of data ethically or equitably, but there's not much guidance on how to make sure that's the case. What do we mean when we're talking about ethics and equity? I think about it in this value chain. We have samples, and I come with the African lens, of course, samples generated in Africa. And historically, our African samples were shipped off continent, and data and insights and action all happened somewhere else, often without even much involvement from African researchers, and definitely not the African populations where the data came from, or the African environmental kind of ecosystems, or the custodians of the data or the samples. So more recently, we're seeing this shift, and it is happening, and that's very exciting. So we're generating much more data on the continent from our own samples. But I think still far too often the insights and the action are happening elsewhere, maybe in better resourced environments. And really, what we're aiming for, what we want as an ethical and equitable kind of arrangement, is for this whole value chain to be happening at the point of origin of our samples. They come from an African country, the data are generated within that country or region. We get the insights we need, and we can convert that to action to benefit our own populations, but then also use the insights and the action to then further benefit the rest of the globe. And we have actually amazing sources of data on the continent. There's no shortage of interesting things that we can learn within Africa that are highly relevant for the rest of the world. So we're certainly not talking about keeping African things for Africans only, but rather about how do we make this work for Africans in an equitable way and also benefit the rest of the world. So I think when we start talking about the ethics and the equity, I think we're coming more to the end of the value chain, which is all about the giving of these benefits, making sure that our insights and action come back and are given to the people who maybe donated their samples or their data, or the spaces, the environments where data were collected or samples were collected to generate insights and action. So it's really about closing the loop and making sure that we're giving back to the appropriate recipients of benefits. And I think, yeah, coming back to the giving end of the whole value chain is really a helpful way to think about it and frame it. So, in the lived experience of African researchers, and I'm sure this is very familiar to many of you, I'm sure I don't even need to really explain this, but for a lot of people working in Africa doing research, we have limited resources often compared to rest of world environments and research funding, etc. And Africans struggle to complete projects before their resources become available to everyone, which means being scooped by well-resourced global North laboratories. And we also tend to lose ethical and research oversight over what happens next with the samples and data we've collected. Even if we are representing our local populations, at some point when the data get pushed out there, we no longer have oversight of who's doing what with them. And it's got some problems in that we've seen, I mean, some terrible publications and incorrect interpretations by researchers who don't have local knowledge, and they can't use the data in the best possible way without that local knowledge. And then also, of course, culturally insensitive, inappropriate, stigmatizing reporting about different communities and environments. And I think it's very difficult to publish without relinquishing control of the data because there's this push from good journals, our sort of quality journals, to want to know how you've made the data available to everyone else. And then just on the sample side, we also have this problem that it becomes often very difficult to access samples once they're in the central repositories, even if you were the researcher who put them in there, or your team did it, or your country did it. And then finally, this problem of attribution. And if you're not attributed as generating data, it's very difficult to leverage that your ability to generate data and grow your research, build a reputation around the data you've created. So when you lose control and you sort of become marginalized on the side of what happens to your data sets that you've made, you lose this ability to showcase what you can do. So yeah, just to summarize, it's about losing out on attribution, sustainability, protection of communities and resources, natural resources. It becomes difficult or harder to develop research programs and to push for collaborative opportunities. And we all know the old story of the risk of becoming sample and data collectors for Global North researchers, and if we're lucky, getting buried somewhere in the middle of an author list on the final publications. Yeah, but I mean, we want to do the research, we want the data to be used, we want African populations to be well represented in global research. So we do need to share more data and more samples to make it happen. But we just need to do it on a level playing field, a fair and equitable kind of agreement around the use of the data and samples. And that's fair and equitable not only to the researchers who did the sort of hands-on data generation, but to communities, to population groups, to custodians of our natural resources. There are many contributors who make data possible, and we need to keep them in mind in this level playing field. So we can leverage data and biospecimen resources to build capacity, to collaborate, to negotiate fair returns and ensure our sustainability, and also to build our careers and protect our research participants. It is possible if we can manage and govern our data well. But I've talked a lot about the must, we should, we ought to, we need to, and I think over the past decades we've been doing a lot of this talking about what we must do, what we should do, what we ought to do, and what we need to do. And I think it's really time to actually do something about it and to move on from identifying the problems and announcing what we ought to be doing and actually do some stuff to make it better. So I'm going to introduce you to two tools that we've built in my group that I hope will be maybe useful and interesting, and hopefully will address some of these problems that certainly I've seen playing over and over again in data governance in Africa. And the tool is what I call a marketplace for African data and biospecimens. And it addresses, several of these key points. So the first point is that data and biospecimens don't need to be centralized or sent away. And other people are not making the decisions about what happens to them next. The data custodians who kind of generated the data or worked in the teams that generated them or have an official local custodian role can make the decisions about what happens next to those data and biospecimens. I'll talk about data because it's a data governance topic today, but you can imagine that it's similar for biospecimens. But also, if we're not just giving everything away and losing control of it, we can negotiate some opportunities for collaboration in the onward use and also start asking for proper benefit sharing and even cost recovery, which is not an uncommon concept in the global north, where people use data that have been generated by a research group. It's not uncommon to actually have a cost recovery model, just to recognize that creating these data sets is expensive work and sustainability is difficult. And even, housing data, hosting data can be quite a costly affair. And then it's also about terms and conditions that need to be tailored to suit the circumstances of sharing. So, one of the kind of premises for responsible data governance is that when you share data onwards, you share on what is required. You don't just hand everything over every single time and put all the data out there. If the data are not needed for a certain purpose, then you shouldn't be just putting out that whole data set, especially where it's data from people or sensitive data. So it would be nice to have a bit more sort of flexibility instead of just having an open access, handed over kind of approach to actually be able to look at the end use, the intentions, the risks, the benefits, and tailor terms and conditions to each particular onward use. And that means maintaining oversight of what happens next. And then also we have these resources that maybe can't be shared, but can still be listed for federated or trusted research environment analyses. I'll come back to these just to explain a little bit more what I mean by that. But certainly, I know, for example, I work with the data from the health service. The data are anonymized, they're perturbed, but they're still data from real people attending health services. And I'm not allowed to share those onward. I can only use them for the authorized research for which I have authorization. And I'm simply not allowed to, the sharing agreement is that I would not hand them on to anyone else. But I could do, for example, some research on those data for someone who wants to partner with me. I could answer a question for them using the data, and that's still secondary use. So it's about being flexible and moving on from this sort of single-minded one way of sharing approach. So the tool that we built that I'll show you shortly is it's not a place to upload data sets or send in samples. So the aim is to provide information about the resources that someone holds. So if I'm a data custodian and I have data sets, I can provide the information about the data sets that I hold, but I don't upload those data sets at all. So it's also not a replacement for other data repositories or biobanks. It's actually complementary. It's another layer. So you could have all your data in a database somewhere and still advertise them on the platform that I'm going to show you. And it doesn't compromise what you've got in the database at all. It's just an additional place to kind of show what you have and arrange to share that resource further. And also, it's not a mechanism for transferring data or biospecimens. We haven't built some kind of big platform where data can be uploaded and moved across or so. So, using this platform, everybody will decide for themselves how to move and transfer whatever it is that they're willing to share down the line. The functionality we looked at is to build a way to list data sets or biospecimen collections. Because this also provides an accessible reference for publications. So, for example, the data set that I was talking about that I work with, I can provide a data availability statement that can point to the record on this platform that explains what the data are, explains how they can and can't be used, and what's possible. So it certainly provides functionality for these tricky situations where you're not able to make things open access, or maybe you've elected not to for other reasons. Yeah, so it gives an alternative way to reference data sets and biospecimen collections when you publish them. We set it up with a low barrier to entry. We didn't want complicated formatting, restrictive fields, or sort of tricky requirements. We wanted to make it very easy to list data sets or biospecimen collections for sharing. And then we thought that it would be really great to have this negotiating space. So when you put out there that you have a data set to share, people can contact you through the platform, through a messaging system, and you can actually chat about what the plan is to do with the data set, what that end user wants to do, and you can have a full record of the discussion online. And then we also realized that sharing agreements are kind of a blind spot for many people. We know we need them and we don't know how to write them. So we also built in a functionality. Once you've had your chat with the person who wants to use your data set, then you've agreed all the terms. there's a data sharing agreement builder or a biospecimen sharing agreement builder that takes you through step by step, prompts you with questions to help you capture the right information. And you and your sharing partner can work through this process and build yourself a memorandum of understanding or a sharing agreement that covers all the main points and is kind of fit for purpose. So it's captured the key points. This is just what I was talking about, the different ways of sharing, the trusted research environment, the federated analysis, or collaborative meta-analysis. What we're used to is what's on the left here, the direct sharing. I've got a data set and I give it to you, and that's kind of the end of the story. But collaborative meta-analyses are maybe I've got a data set, you've got a very similar data set, and we actually agreed to join them together and do a joint analysis and publish it jointly or put it out there as a joint effort. And that we've called the collaborative meta-analysis. A federated analysis is also becoming much more common. And what this looks like is I've got data that I can't share. You've got similar data that you can't share. So we agree the analysis we're going to do in a kind of standardized way. I do it on my data set, you do it on your data set, and then we bring together the results, aggregated results, and report on those jointly. And then finally, the trusted research environment, the thinking behind this is that I have a data set that people can, approved users can do some research, but they can't see the data and they can't download the actual data. They can only run their analyses. So these tend to be online platforms where the data are stored, but the data are completely masked. So authorized users, they might get a dummy data set so they can build their scripts or work out the analysis. Then they get access and they can run the analysis and get the aggregated outputs, which are then checked and released to them. So this is a way to protect data, but still facilitate authorized users to do some research on the data. And we actually wrote up these different types of data sharing and kind of the clauses that you need in data sharing agreements for these different approaches. And you can find our paper there. I put the QR code. It's in BMJ Global Health. So we've built the platform. I'll show you how to find it soon, but just to reiterate kind of how it works, the processes. If I'm someone who's generated a data set, I can register and create a profile, and then I can list the data set or data sets that I have available that I might be willing to share when the terms and conditions are right and I'm happy with the agreement. And we've set the platform up so that it is for African data and African biospecimens that can be put out there. But anyone from anywhere in the world can then go and look through. They also have to register and create a profile. I mean, they can browse without a profile, but to do any kind of interactions on the platform, they need to register and create a user profile. And they can search the listings and find things that they would like to use. And then at that point, they can connect through the chat function, through the messaging function. Maybe they send a message. I saw that data set you have. It's really, I'm really looking for something like that to do this analysis. I've got the ethics approval. This is what it looks like. The person who generated the data set might be happy to just hand over the data, or they might say, well, yeah, I've got a master's student who would love to learn that technique. May they join the analysis and then you can use the data, or however it goes. Everybody makes their own decisions in these interactions. And then once they've agreed the kind of sharing and the terms and conditions, then they can use within the platform the agreement builder that takes them stepwise through each of the clauses and helps them to address each of the key points that should be in a sharing agreement. So we went through the process of building this. We spent a whole year writing a specification and doing what we call the wireframing, looking at the functionality, how does it work together. This was what was kind of inside my head when we first met with the user interface people and the software developers to write the specification. So we spent a lot of time planning and working out how it's going to look. And how things fit together. And then year 2 and 3 was development and user testing with our partners, Hominem, our user interface team, and Method Lab, our software developers, and they did a really great job. And yeah, we're actually live. The platform is live. adbex.org. It went live just towards the end of last year. Every now and then we find a little thing that needs to be tweaked. So just remember it's in its early stages, but it's open for everyone and anyone to use at adbex.org. And it kind of looks like this. When you go online and you enter the platform, you can create a profile and or sign in if you already have a profile. And we've set it up so you can also use your ORCID ID or a Google address, however you wish to do it, or you can make a bespoke sign in. And we ask everyone to sign in with their real name and to have an affiliated institute. Just so that we make sure we know when someone contacts you, you kind of know who they are and who you are dealing with. And then once you've gone through that process, if you're the user who has a data set and you want to share it, you can simply go up here where the arrow is, click on list your data and biospecimen, data set and biospecimen, and this will take you through a quite a sort of shepherded process to list the information about your data set and your or your biospecimen collections. So we set a low barrier to entry. The agreement was if I had maybe 100 DNA samples in the fridge that I knew I was allowed to use for certain purposes, and I knew they came from a certain country, South Africa, and I knew they were from a particular species. Maybe they were from, I don't know, cattle. Then if I only knew that, I'm able to still, that's the minimum data set to be able to list what I've got on the platform. But above and beyond that, there are many more optional fields to describe your data set or your collection of samples. We used a lot of back-end ontologies and also some AI to kind of help standardize how you capture the information. And you can get as granular as you like. You can have DNA samples, you can capture how you prep them, how you stored them, more detail if there's a disease associated or a phenotype associated. It gets more and more granular, and you can choose whether you want to get into the detail or not. You can also write a text description that can help you explain what you have. So it's entirely up to the user to get into the detail or not for your data set or your collection. And remember, when you list it, you're not committing to any kind of sharing. You're literally just saying, this is what I've got. And then if people are interested, oh yeah, I just wanted to say we did these main sections, human, microbial, animal, plant, and then we have other where you can craft various other types of data. But we made the metadata back end sort of tailored to human, microbial, animal, and plant to make it easier for users to list what they have. And we have crafted the platform so that in the future we can add other types of data as well. It doesn't have to be limited to what we have there. So some of the ones we've been considering as well are environmental data and paleontological data, for example. I mean, you could still go and list those now. You would just have to do it all as a text description because we don't have the specific crafted fields. But hopefully, as time evolves, we'll be able to add more types of data to make it more streamlined for people who want to share those other types of data. And then anyone in the world, as I said, although the listings are for African data and biospecimens, anyone can come and look for these things. So you could enter and find other data sets and biospecimens. And you can go and browse around and have a look what's there without a profile. But as soon as you want to message someone and reach out to them and start chatting, you will need a registered profile at that time. And then during that messaging process, because we realized sometimes you might be looking for data or biospecimens to use, and then somebody wants to share them, and actually you're not the decision maker. So there's a functionality that at any point in the chatting process or in building the sharing agreement, you can invite others into the conversation. So maybe you have a legal team who handles these things, or maybe your PI needs to get involved, or your head of department. At any point, you can put their email address in with their permission, of course, and that will bring them into the conversation. And then once you've chatted in the messaging system and you've sort of agreed in general what the principles are, you can go to the agreement builder and together go stepwise through the process and fill in all the information. And at the end, you can output a Word document that is a data sharing agreement. Just to say, it's not a legal agreement because there was no way that we could imagine every possible country pairing in terms of a user and a data holder and how we could accommodate all the legal the legislation from all the different countries in the world. Instead, it's a data sharing agreement. But if you go through that process, the document that you generate will have all the information that your legal team needs to turn it into a legally binding sharing agreement that you would normally have if you're between institutions or cross-border or however you normally do it. So we're not pretending to create a legal solution, but rather a way to capture all the nuances of the sharing agreement in a systematic way so you don't forget to fill in what your conflict resolution plan is, for example, or who's going to hold the IP of anything that comes out of it. It helps you capture all the right information, whether it's just an MOU with your partner down the hall in your institution, or it's a full-on legal agreement that your legal team are going to draft to make it legally binding. So we invite you to give it a go. Adbex is live. You can list what you've got. We're hoping that yeah, people will really start to engage and start to put their resources in there because, of course, it's difficult to go and search for a resource if nothing's uploaded yet. But we already have some users who are using it as their primary way of exposing what they have available to the rest of the world. And we're also working, there's some blogs up there already, and we've got a resources section. So we're working on populating those. We're actively working on it. There's some blogs in there already and a few resources, but that will be growing over the next year. Yeah, what's next? So what we also recognize, we have some super users, for example, biorepositories, and it would be great for them if they don't have their own front end particularly, but even if they do, to be able to list their enormous collections that they have up there. So this year, we're creating APIs so that super users can suck in the data in an automated way and get their listings up there, but also bulk upload facility. So, if you can prepare a file with all the information for all your different listings, then we can populate the platform, your user profile, much more rapidly. So you don't have to sit and type each one in individually. So this functionality is coming soon. And we'll also be building functionality for institutions who want to keep track of and link with what the different researchers in the institution have on the platform. So that's also functionality we'll be working on this year and bringing in this year. And then we also will be traveling around the continent to various sites just to come and run a roadshow, show people how it works, introduce people to it, and hopefully familiarize you all with that and get to meet some of our end users, which would be really great. Yeah. So we already had a launch with Science for Africa Foundation towards the end of last year, and we visited Kemri Welcome in Kilifi, also to show people what it is, how it works, how it can be used, the Adbex platform. So that was really great, and we really appreciated being hosted there. And then I'm just going to take a few minutes to introduce you to another tool that we made, also an equity and data sharing tool. This is a data sharing license that we created it under the Adbex platform or project, but this is for everyone, anywhere in the world, for any type of data. And the idea is to imagine you have a data set or a collection of data sets that you're willing to share. And I mean, a collection of data sets could even be a database that's out there already. But you have some specific terms and conditions that you want to communicate for onward use of your data. And this can be terms and conditions for a data set or a data set collection. And it can also be the terms and conditions for a whole database. The whole database could operate under one license, a data sharing license that applies to all the data in the database. And this is a way to clearly communicate your terms and conditions up front. I don't know how many people are familiar with Creative Commons. If you look up in the top right-hand corner here, The Creative Commons was obviously an inspiration for this. This is more for creative material and media that people might put online or put out there, and they are able to generate a Creative Commons license that says these are the terms and conditions for onward use for these media, for this picture, this image, for this piece of written work. And so we've created something similar, but for data sets. We've thought about all the different terms and conditions that might be needed for sharing data sets and that we might want to communicate. And we've set up this platform also online where you can go to the website and you can answer a set of questions. I think it's about 7 or 8 questions. You can choose whether you want to add specific details. Maybe you want to make a license for a particular data set, but maybe you want to make a generic license that's for all your data sets, so then you wouldn't need to put in all the specifics of a single data set. It's up to you how much you want to add in or not in terms of details. And then as you add all the questions, as you can see on the right here, so you're just going back, this builds a license for you. So as you click on the left, the first question is what kind of sharing is permitted? Those types we talked about, maybe all of them are. The license populates on the right and you can track it as you go. And then these are the icons we have, and these are all the different things that are reflected in the questions. Attribution, types of sharing, what kind of publication and dissemination is allowed, is benefit sharing required, is commercial use permitted, is there a cost recovery requirement? Are you allowed to share the data onward? And if you do you have to use the same terms and conditions and license, or are you allowed to change the data set and move it on? So these are all these different icons that reflect the different terms and conditions. And once you've completed all the questions and you've answered it all, you get a license on the right that you can then download. So you can download a PDF written license that explains what people can and can't do with your data set. You can get this cute little logo that has all the terms and conditions visible in a visual way. And then we also have a machine readable version. So I didn't actually show it here, but if you go to the JSON data, this is like a big data dictionary of the terms and conditions in a standardized way that makes it machine readable. And then HTML, like an HTML widget that you can embed in if you've got a website and you've got your data there and you actually want to put the license widget there as well. You can also get that directly. So yeah, those are the main things. I just put this up just as some other useful and hopefully fun tools that we've made. We've got a benefit sharing framework out there, which is like a big matrix that aims to make it easier to work out how to do benefit sharing. I mean, we all know we ought to be doing it, and it's so hard to know what does that look like. So we created a tool that makes it easier to work out what that looks like for you in your project and to help you identify ways that can work for you. We also made a set of guidelines on acceptable practices for sharing pathogen data, the Phage Microbial Data Sharing Accord. And this is like common decency, the baseline common decency rules for sharing microbial data and pathogen data. And this is trying to just set a standard from which other negotiations can follow on, at least a common starting place that we can all be familiar with, and then we can adjust as we need to. And then finally, we also created a wastewater surveillance ethics advisor app. This is for people working with data or samples from wastewater. Just a reminder, if you're working with the data, for example, for certain types of data, what are the kind of legal, societal, ethical, equity, and justice questions that you need to think about as you work with those data, or if you're getting ethics approval. So the app is, it's very simple language. It's just alerts and prompts. Don't forget to think about, whatever health acts you have, or are notifiable diseases legislated in your country, and that kind of thing. So it really is just a little prompt to help wastewater surveillance people to work out what they can and can't do and what they need to think about in ethical terms. And then I'm just putting a challenge out there to think about, are you a getter or a giver? Are you all about getting data? Are you all about giving back to the people who deserve the benefits, or the environments that deserve the benefits, or the communities, populations? And really about equitable, that E at the end of the FAIR principles. I think part of it is just thinking about the right balance between being a getter and a giver. So that's kind of how I frame it in my head, about making sure that we do things well, ethically, equitably. Yeah. Just acknowledging my group, and I have an ongoing long-term collaboration with Phage, which is really valuable on the microbial side. And my team, Tane and Eddie, have been really the drivers behind AdBix and worked really hard to help stand it up. And then recognizing our team, our collaborators in Hominem and Method Lab, and then also always recognizing funding. I have a Callistus Tumor Fellowship from the Gates Foundation that made the AdBix platform possible, and it also funded the development work for the data sharing license. And then the last year, I had really a privilege of going to Berlin for 6 months and working with the Charité Global Center for Public Health and the WHO Hub for Pandemic and Epidemic Intelligence. And this really facilitated being able to do the development of the data sharing license together with the developers who were funded by the CJ Fellowship. So really acknowledging that fellowship, that 6 month fellowship from Charité and WHO, the WHO Hub in Berlin, really facilitated that work as well. Okay, thank you. I think that's it. Yeah. I'm wondering if you can see me yet, or I'm still a sad invisible black box. Sorry, that's really unfortunate.
I'm so sorry about that, Nikia. We've been trying to frantically figure out what the problem is, and unfortunately, we're just not finding a resolution. But in the interim, I will just opt to share your profile so that we are all looking at
Oh,
something
thank
in
you.
the
So at least you
meantime.
have some idea what I look like.
Yeah, so sorry about that, everyone.
No problem. I
Um,
have no idea what happened. Yeah.
Yeah, so sorry about that, but wonderful presentation, Nikki. It's so great to see all the wonderful work you and your team are accomplishing,
Oh, thank
especially
you.
in supporting everybody else in making data sharing so much less intimidating, in my opinion. It's becoming much less of a black box exercise and becoming so transparent what is required. And I think that is one of the most amazing things I think that could come out of this work, is
Oh,
making it
thank you.
more accessible for those of us that are keen to do things the right way.
Yeah.
um,
I
Thank you
think
so
it's
much.
quite scary because we all know what we ought to be doing and must be doing and should be doing, but how to do it? I mean, many of us are researchers. It's not something we have training in at all. And often it's like that thing where people say, "Oh, you must write your scientific things well." It's like, well, we know we need to write it well, but how do you do that? And I think data governance is the same thing. We know we need to do it, but that's why we just went to building tools. We felt that would be an easier way forward. Yeah.
Amazing work, amazing work. Um, We do have time for one or two very quick questions. We don't have a lot of time left. But if there are any burning or pressing questions, now is your opportunity to ask. We can take one or two. You are welcome to use the Q&A tool, which is the preferred way of asking a question. But I have just allowed everybody to be able to use the chat box if you would prefer to use the chat box. And you should also be in a position now to unmute yourselves if you would like to raise your hand and pose a question directly. So I'll pause for a second or two just to see if there are any questions.
And while we're waiting to see if people have questions, I'd also just like to say, I mean, we really would value feedback. So if you use the tools, if there are things that don't quite work for you, we have a LinkedIn site for African Data and Biospecimen Exchange. So you can find us there. You can send us a message. Absolutely feel free to reach out. Oh, we've got a hand. Great.
Muwonge, please to go ahead with your question.
Do you have to maybe unmute them?
They should be in a position to unmute
Oh,
themselves. Muwonge,
I know I
Hello?
couldn't when I came.
Are you
Oh, there
able
we
to
are.
hear me?
there
Great.
we go. We can hear
Hi.
you fine.
Yes. I wanted to ask, hello, I hope everyone is here. Thank you for the presentation.
Oh, you're speaking very softly. Can I ask you to just lean into the mic?
I don't know what. Can you hear me now?
Ah, much better. Thank you.
Yes, I
Yeah.
wanted to first say thanks for the presentation. Um, and my question would be around is there sort of like a review process somewhere to make sure that the data, the platform is being used well? Because I understand you give the user, let's say, an interface to chat with the data owner, and they can include other, stakeholders of the
Yeah.
data. Yeah, but could there be like a review process to make sure that this resource is not being misused on your end? Yes.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. So we do have, for a start, we have the requirement that anyone who wants to use any of the functionality must have a profile. So nobody can just come in there unless they've created a profile. That's the first thing. And then, of course, we have, the usual kind of protections against being spammed or scraped and that kind of thing. So protection of the user's data, of course. And then we also have avenues to report if there's anyone who feels that someone is not being appropriate. Then we have the avenues, of course, to report and shut that down immediately. Yeah, great.
Great, thanks, Nikki. Any other questions? Any burning questions that anybody might still have? Or any experiences you would like to contribute to the discussion while we have a few minutes? In the
So
meantime, while
also,
we maybe,
yeah.
sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I mean, do people feel that they might use this? I mean, if you can give me under the react button, a thumbs up if you think you would use it, or a thumbs down if you think you wouldn't, the platform and the data sharing license. Oh, we got one. Yeah, okay. I haven't seen any down thumbs yet. I did think, oh, yes, in the chat. Thanks, Angela. I did think that these are things, the first time you are submitting a paper and you've got to write that data sharing statement, that's a moment to think, oh, yes, actually, I can go there and do it there. I think people will remember as you get to that point that in fact there is a platform where you can do this without necessarily uploading the data that you maybe are not allowed to put out there or you haven't finished working on and you're not ready to. But it's still data availability because people can contact you if they want to use those data and have a discussion with you what that might look like. Great. I didn't see any other hands. Yeah.
No,
Is
no
everyone a
hands,
bit
no
overwhelmed? Oh,
questions. Oh,
Andrea.
one more. Andrea, please go ahead.
No, sorry, it was a mistake. But
Oh, no problem, no
Oh,
congratulations on
problem.
the
okay.
talk, and it's really fascinating and very interesting how you are making like these tools to really address the inequality with data
Oh, great.
usage.
Thanks,
Yeah,
Andrea.
thank you.
Sorry to put you on the spot. Yeah.
And then there was a question that came through, I think accidentally to me privately, that I'll just read out loud, Professor Tiffin. So there was a question saying, thank you for the brilliant presentation. The platform enables collaboration between researchers from different backgrounds. Are there any remedies if the clauses established between the teams are not respected?
Yeah, it's also a great question. Thank you for that. Yeah. So this is this tricky space of enforcement. And so from our side, we have very clear terms and conditions that we are not, as AdBex, part of the agreement that gets made. So for every user, yeah, we can, I will share the link. For every user that makes an agreement, they must go through the normal processes they would go through to set up a sharing agreement with another group. And that is unchanged. So we make that very clear in the terms and conditions because there's no way as AdBex that we could then somehow make that track everything for every single agreement that gets made on the platform. So yeah, I mean, it would be great if we could, but to be honest, even now, I'm not sure how these things are tracked in real life. And it's a big, tricky space that we haven't solved particularly well, I don't think, as people using data and generating data. And it's one we don't have great answers for. The one thing I would say with the data sharing license and the AdVex platform, I think if you've made a data sharing license to go with your data set, then the having a license, the end user can't say, "Oh, I didn't know I can't do that." So I think this is one step towards being able to enforce things because you have such clear terms and conditions that if the person at the other end breaches them, you've got a very clear, if they've signed off on that data sharing license as the conditions of use, or if they have navigated with you through the data sharing agreement, which is stored on the platform, you have a record of it forever and the discussion forever. That is much easier to enforce than if you had some kind of fuzzy agreement that wasn't properly written and had all sorts of gray areas. So we're trying to make it easier to enforce, but we can't be enforcers. It's unfortunately that is beyond our scope, as we like to say in our rebuttals to various critiques in science. Yeah, it's too much for us to take on. Yeah. Yeah. So I just saw there's some other questions. Can I quickly, I know we've only got 2 minutes. Shall I just have a quick look?
Yeah, sure.
Are there any, yeah, so we did, are there any remedies? So I've just put the link for AdVex and when we end, I'll put the data sharing license builder link as well. So if you want that, just hold on a sec and ABI, don't disconnect me till I've had a chance to drop it in the chat. Yeah, and then the data's okay. So yeah, Bernard, great question. So it's quite new. So at the moment, it's not a lot. We don't have a catalog page as such. It's more that you would do a search because we believe as it gets more populated, a catalog would be overwhelming. But what we will have in time is hopefully a dashboard just to give a general idea of what's in there. So that is down the line. But the thing that can change it is all of you end users starting to advertise what you have in there and list what you have in there. So we're looking to you to help us populate it. I think when we've got the bulk upload, that will also be a game changer because if we have big biobanks and big data repositories that also want to put their listings in there, that will also help. It'll become a one place where you can go and see what's out there. That's kind of the intention. Yeah. If a data owner has been unresponsive, oh, okay. So yeah, so that is something I guess that again through the channels, there's a space to contact us and say, I'm having a problem with this person, they're not answering, and then we can follow it up centrally. Yeah, so that is the thinking around that. Yeah, so it's something, of course, as it evolves, we'll then get more of a sense of how much that is needed or not. Is it something that we're going to have to build in more checks and balances, or is it going to run fairly smoothly? And that is something we'll keep an eye on. Absolutely. Yeah. Okay, I know we're on the hour. Oh, yeah. No, we don't have a TRE, Henry. We just have a space where you can connect with people. But yeah, we're not going to be transferring data for anyone. If you have data and you agree with someone else that you're going to use it, that's between the two of you how you're going to do the data transfer, or you would agree that in your data sharing agreement. So you would need your own TRE. We don't host a TRE at all. Yeah. Okay, let me, in the meantime, drop that other link for the data sharing platform. Over to you, Verena.
Great. Thank you so much, Professor Tiffin, for this wonderful discussion and the wonderful presentation. We are at the top of the hour, so I won't say too much and keep anybody here any longer, but just thank you to all the participants as well for making the time to be here. I hope that it's been a really useful presentation and that we've learned something new, which I think we've all at least learned about your wonderful new platform, which I will personally be making use of. Thank you so much for the engagement, for the wonderful questions, and of course to Professor Tiffin for leading this webinar. Thank you so much, and
Thanks,
we wish you
everyone. It's been
great
really
day
a
further.
pleasure. And the links are now in the chat. So if you need them before you jump off, just go over to there.
Wonderful. Thank you
Great.
so
Thanks,
much, everyone.
everyone. Enjoy your day further. Bye-bye.
You too. Bye. Thank you.